Hello and welcome back, and that is right, we're returning to the subject of Plex. We're looking at a new CPU for this series, and today we are looking at this. This is the Intel i5-1235U processor, originally launched, as you can see there, in the beginning of 2022. This is still a CPU we find in a lot of modern NAS devices. It's a 10-core CPU, it's got 8 efficiency cores, 2 power cores, and it's got 1.2 GHz Iris Xe graphics. And in today's Plex test video, we're looking at 1080p, 4K, and 8K media streaming. Now, in order to do this, we need a NAS, and luckily Teramaster have supplied us with the F6-424 Max NAS. This arrives with that CPU. It also features, if we open up the specifications, I'll be able to show it to you there on screen. The overview, you're able to see there, not only have we got that CPU already good to go, but if we look at the memory utilization, we've got 8 gig of memory. And if one thing we're going to take away from this video, by the way, particularly when it comes to playing 8K media, 8 gig, we need a little bit more. Luckily, you can upgrade it in this system, and thanks again to Teramaster supplying today's hardware, and you can pick up this NAS right now for $899 in a 4-bay, $999 in a 6-bay on B&H. You also got it there on Amazon for a similar price, or you can make a little bit of a saving if you buy it from their own website. There should be links below, but without further ado, let's crack straight on. Now, in this video, we're going to go through 1080p first, and while we play a 1080p file on the left-hand side of the screen, we're going to skip on ahead and immediately go into a 30 megabits per second HEVC file. This is not a small file. 30 megabits per second HEVC, or highly efficient video codec, is pretty dense for modern HD media. So if we play that there on the right hand side of the screen, we can go into the dashboard. As you can see, we're playing that file. We can see CPU utilization there, a little bit there, gone up to just 2.29%, and we're streaming this file over the local area network, and we're using a web browser to do so. And later on, we will be utilizing this client application on Windows in order to stream more files, but more on that later on. It's also worth highlighting, for example, if we stop that file again and play it from scratch, that we're playing in original quality, but what if we want to convert it down to 160p or potato quality? Now, who's going to do that? No one's really going to do that, but we're doing this to demonstrate the abilities of this NAS, and more precisely that CPU, in converting files with hardware transcoding. You can see the conversion there, HW, meaning hardware transcoding. And if we make our way into the back-end agent here, I've set make my CPU hurt, and there at the bottom we've ensured that hardware transcoding is taking place with the integrated graphics of this NAS. Now, if we had a graphics card inside, we could set that up on there, but we want to see if this NAS is going to be good enough for you when it comes to Plex Media Server streaming there. Now, if we go back to the 1080p media, we go to something denser, and we're going straight into a 100 megabits per second HEVC file. Playing it back, original quality there, we go back into the dashboard, we're able to see playing in original quality, and the CPU there barely troubled. We're at 4%, give or take. Now, why is this important? It means when you're playing files like this, chances are that you are going to be streaming files simultaneously. Now, as you can see on the left-hand side, the file isn't playing. Now, why is that? There's a multitude of reasons. It could be the network bandwidth, although realistically, it's not the case on my setup here. My setup here, I'm running a 2.5 gig connection and running a 10 gig connection in tandem, and this NAS is connected via 10 GBE in the background as well. Bottom line, there are no bottlenecks here when it comes to my local area network, which brings us back to what do we think is the problem? Well, chances are it is Chrome. Chrome isn't great sometimes for streaming stuff like this. We convert it down to something smaller, then it will push through a smaller file, and as you can see, then it will play back that file there. But this is where when we want to test some particularly dense media, that we would go over to the application. This is the client tool. So whether it is you're enjoying your multimedia on your smart TV, on your mobile phone, your tablet, or whatever, if you want to, sort of measure these things, it's better to move away from the web browser tab for some tests where it is quite dense, and go ahead and play them. So let's find that 100 megabits per second file, and as you'll see, plays like a charm. Original quality, no problems whatsoever. And if we go down, convert it down to 328p, a particularly awkward compression technique. And as you can see, CPU utilization, it did spike there at 15 at one point, but still nonetheless barely too much to be worried about, and that means even if you were to consume 12% CPU utilization live when accessing this, that still leaves plenty of CPU for if you want to stream multiple copies of this file at any given time. Now moving into 4K media, let's go into a 120 megabits per second 4K file, HEVC 10-bit HDR. HEVC, or highly efficient video codec. Often when you do want to play files like this, one of the problems you might come across with an HEVC file is the device you're utilizing may not have an HEVC license, and that's an example of when you're going to want the NAS server to do the converting for you. Keep in mind, most users that stream locally on their local area network are not going to need to worry about this, but say for example if you're in a hotel room in the other side of the world from your NAS that's sitting there in your bedroom, chances are your upload download isn't going to be great, and therefore that's when converting can really help you out. But if we play this file, original quality, we'll convert it down to 720p, and as you can see, it's going to switch over to the HW, or hardware transcoding, in just a moment. We're seeing the file playing there native, transcoding is happening, and we're seeing the CPU there go up to about 17%. Now it's worth highlighting this NAS, in case you're wondering about whether there is possible bottlenecks being caused by storage media, I made sure that this system only had SSDs inside. So for example, if we go into the storage area of this NAS, you'll be able to see that I only put 2 drives inside here, but both of them are SATA SSDs, and they're in a standard mirrored RAID. That SATA SSD will be pumping out 300 to 400 megabytes per second, and again they're in a RAID as well. Bottom line, there's going to be no storage bottleneck while we're doing this. Again, if we were running this off a single mechanical hard drive, there might have been the odd bottleneck, but it's not really too much to worry about. Another thing to keep in mind, look down there at the RAM. The RAM on the right hand side, we went from it sitting there at virtually nothing at 1.3% to suddenly going to 6%. That's because at 4K and indeed later on in 8K media, memory utilization gets hungrier. So keep that in mind. Maybe if you're only playing one file, it's not a problem, but once you start streaming to multiple devices at once and they're hitting larger density 120 or 100 megabits per second bandwidth and above, keep in mind bit rate and above, you're going to need more memory, and that 8 gig this system arrives with may need an upgrade. But if we go straight into a 200 megabits per second HEVC 10-bit HDR file and play that file, there we're using it in the web browser. Again, we're not really going to have much luck. So let's bring that down and convert it down to something smaller and simultaneously play that larger file here in the client application, bringing that down. We're going to tax the system a little bit more. The web browser is going to have a bit of a hard time playing that. We're already using 1/4 gigabyte in that one tab alone. And if we look up, we're playing original quality in both. It's playing the one at the bottom. It's playing this one here. Let's throw in an additional transcode just for the hell of it. Transcode there. Another one's going to transcode in a second. CPU utilization peaked at 19%. But with 2 transcodes happening at once, the CPU now going up to 27%, we're reaching 1/4 of the available hardware resources. But still nonetheless, realistically, this file is not normal. Most users are not going to have a 200 megabits per second 4K file that's HDR in their collection. This is when you're looking at RAW, it's when you're looking at GoPros, when you're looking at unfettered recorded raw media indeed. And on that subject, this is a 400 megabits per second 4K file. I know I talk about this over and over in previous videos, but I've got to say this in case this is the first video you are watching. This file isn't just big. If we go in to the NAS and look where these test files are, we're loading them in from a USB connected drive there that we're copying them over. So if we go to the original file there, go into the test files there, open that up, go into Plex Media Server Testing 4K. That file is 1.4 gigabytes in size. That's enormous for a 30-second file. That gives you some idea about the density of this file and therefore how unlikely it is you have a file in your collection that is this beefy. That means 1.4 gig for 30 seconds, that's 2.8 gigabytes for 1 minute. Imagine that file size at 90 minutes length in a movie form. Something to keep in mind. But let's move over to 8K. Now, if you thought we had trouble playing files in the web browser when we were looking at dense 4K media, man alive, 8K is going to give you a headache. Here's 8K. This is a helium file. This is called Helium Fire. It's from a space station. As you can see, we've got to convert it immediately because not only is playing an 8K file in the web browser kind of bonkers, but on top of that, Plex isn't exactly optimized for 8K media yet. Yes, we're accessing this on the local area network, and if we look at the resource utilization there, you can see the network there is still doing well. However, as you see, even on this local machine I'm using right now, we're still using a lot of hardware resources just to record this media, so keep that in mind. So trying to test 8K media in the web browser, even if we try to convert it down to something manageable, is sort of a waste of time. Hell, on the right hand side of the screen here, it's not even registered actual playback yet. It's kind of oversaturating the whole thing. So let's come out of that there, and this time make our way into the application from earlier to find out more. Apologies in the break in recording there. I just wanted to restart my network interface there. I'm accessing a lot of this testing here via a virtual machine, and therefore I wanted to double check that it wasn't a network problem that stopped that previous file playing. It wasn't, but I just wanted to eliminate that eventuality. Let's carry on. Sticking here with the application here, as you can see, it's playing that file absolutely fine, exactly as you would intended. Let's leave that there. Let's reopen here on the left hand side of the screen the dashboard here on the i5 processor. Bring that up, manage server settings there, go into dashboard. As you can see, playing the file, original quality. CPU utilization still pretty darn low. RAM utilization not so shabby. Playing absolutely fine there. So let's go ahead and reshape that file, put it down to a 240p file. So this will be hardware transcoding of quite a substantial degree to bring an 8K file down to just 240p. Very few people are going to do that. First thing to note, as you can see when we played that 8K file, the bandwidth there really did shoot up there. Unsurprisingly, most of these 8K files are pretty substantial in terms of their size. We've still got plenty of network bandwidth to play with, but still nonetheless we are seeing a slowdown on that playback. On the right hand side, that CPU is maxed out at 19.16. We do have to factor in, of course, that it is transcoding that file, and again, my local PC here may have dropped some of the frames, but still that 8K file didn't exactly play ideally there. And again, look at that RAM utilization. Interestingly though, look at the system RAM utilization rather than just the Plex. That is not an organic spike there, so we have to quickly make our way over to the NAS to find out if that was additional processing happening inside the NAS. If we go into its own resource monitor there, find out more information about what's going on. So let's go into the resource manager, have a little look what was going on there. The utilization again still pretty high there. We've managed to settle it down, so it was definitely Plex playing that file, but 8K pushing through that CPU and therefore this NAS might be something to keep an eye on there. But let's crack on. Now we're going to go into Japan 8K. This is a 24 frames per second HVEC file there. Again, original quality absolutely fine there. Playing fine. Again, it's a 4.5 minute file. See on the right hand side of the screen, playback natively absolutely fine. We're seeing that bandwidth spike to around about 3/4 of a gigabit in terms of utilization. CPU absolutely fine. And another test we can quickly do is, remember we are streaming this locally. Let's just jump around the file. Let's see if it can keep up with me playing silly buggers with the time bar there. Remember, the dark orange represents buffering and the light orange represents playback. You don't want playback to outperform buffering. Still, it played fine. Tiny little jumps there on the CPU as I was utilizing and jumping around. Let's move on to another 8K file. This is Peru 8K. This is a 60 frames per second HDR HEVC file. Very, very high quality. This is a 10 gigabyte test file here, and as you can see, playing it like a dream and playing fine. We've got the original quality there. Bandwidth utilization has almost reached a full gigabit, and down there, absolutely fine CPU utilization. It's just over 5.5 minute file. Let's jump around, force the system to buffer this file for us, and it's running fine. And if we try and transcode that file, let's go in, transcode it down to a hilarious 160p. Let's see how this deals with that. No doubt CPU utilization is going to jump up, notwithstanding. Look at that memory utilization spike as well. We've gone from a laughable 1.3% now up to 15% overall. And the potato quality file there, it is playing, but I'm not going to say it's smooth. But at least it's only utilizing 20% of available CPU utilization there. We do have to question bandwidth there, but nonetheless, it does still mean that even if you had 2, maybe even 3 people accessing an 8K file of this density, and for some bizarre reason they wanted to downgrade the file to 160p, perhaps they're watching an old Tamagotchi or an iPod Shuffle, then perhaps that would be useful to them. But at least the hardware transcoding is doing its job. The big takeaway I think right now is that this CPU, if you're going to use a NAS with this CPU inside, can play back 8K, and notwithstanding the fact that it can play back 8K, but as long as you've got the bandwidth and you're going to take advantage perhaps of the 10GBE network interfaces of a NAS like this one, and take advantage of a greater than gigabit internet connection, you can play back original quality 8K to multiple clients at any given time. Once you factor in transcoding, it can get even better. So say, for example, you wanted to watch this 8K file to something a bit more palatable. So let's say 1080p. You could do a 1080p transcode and you'd still have a decent amount of CPU and memory left over. I'd still recommend having at least 16 gig for that kind of setup, but right now, looking at the CPU utilization, I would say right now you can comfortably watch 8K transcoded to 1080p for 2 to 3 devices. Just keep an eye on your network bandwidth there. But there you go. That has been the Plex media server testing of the Intel i5-1235U NAS CPU. Thanks again to Terramaster for supplying the hardware for today's video. Again, keep in mind this CPU is not the newest in the field, but when it comes to servers, it is still very popular. But if you want to get hold of a system like this yourself, you can head over to B&H and get either the 4-bay or the 6-bay version of this device. Again, that has 2 Gen 4 M.2 NVMe's inside as well as 2 10GBE connections, and that goes for the 4-bay as well. You can pick it up on Amazon and of course Teramaster's own website as well. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. There will be links in the description to other reviews of similar NASes to this, and indeed the review we did on the F6464 Max. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.